Our first speaker is Anirban Banerjee, VP Engineering from Thycotic. Anirban has built two startups and got three NSF. So for people not familiar with NSF, it's a National Science Foundation Awards, and six patents, 12 peer-reviewed papers in computer science journals. And he has 12 years of experience in enterprise security and has been the presenter for all kinds of major security conferences. Anirban has a PhD in computer science from University of California, Riverside. And his topic for today is a privileged access everywhere from anywhere, especially to addressing the PAM in the post-COVID-19 world. So let's welcome Anirban to give us the first speech.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Brian. And welcome to everyone who's on this call. We appreciate your time, and a big warm welcome to all the other panelists. Thank you for being here. Your support means a lot. It's a pleasure to be here. So yes, as Brian mentioned, our goal today is to share some of our learnings that we see in the world of privileged access management, primarily focusing on how has the world changed in these last 8 or 9 months. What is the focus now that we see in the market? What is the focus now that we see other companies are trying to achieve go towards? You'll see that on the slide, we've mentioned anything, anywhere, anytime. Why is that important? The reason why that's important is because with this work from home situation that we are all dealing with on a daily basis, it's no longer the use case that enterprises, mid-market companies have a very set group of resources that somebody needs access to from an employee perspective, from a vendor perspective, from a customer perspective. In fact, the types of things that companies were providing access to has just exploded over these last 8 to 9 months. The question is then natural to ask, wait a second, what are you saying? 2 years ago, did we not access Google Suite from our homes? Did we not access any other applications from our homes? Absolutely, we did. But what has happened as a substantial change in the last 8 to 9 months is the types of applications that have now been put on the internet and the number of applications that have been put on the internet for access have both changed. And therefore, that word anything is now becoming extremely important. Anywhere is obvious because now we are all working from virtual locations, not just from our homes. Sometimes we are working from our parents' homes, other places, somebody's taking a vacation. So it's no longer even the static, somebody's working from home and then they're coming to the office, they're going back home, they're coming to the office. The number of locations is not as static as we always think. Anytime is also now a really important factor because as you work from home, especially for people who have families, you oftentimes have to make compromises to make sure that everybody's taken care of. And a lot of the companies who are in the IT domain, technology domain, they provide flexible hours to their employees and so on and so forth. So the traditional work access patterns that we used to see from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, Active Directory identity logins would spike. Those things are a thing of the past at this point of time. So therefore, all these three words have significant meaning in what we discussed today. Let's keep moving forward. By the way, I would like to credit one of my colleagues, Anshul Kaushik, significantly for a lot of the material that's over here. He's one of the most brilliant people that I've worked with at Thycotic. But to dig down into these slides a little bit, what are we trying to highlight over here using this diagram? Simple as it may be, the point is that credentials are everywhere and access is everywhere. You can no longer dictate where are people going to be from the perspective of geolocation when they access something. For example, due to this work from home situation, if you end up going to your grocery store and you get and this is especially true for people in IT operations, DevOps operations, if you get an immediate alert and you get some kind of a message that, hey, a server needs to be rebooted, something needs to happen, you need to access and do something immediately, you cannot wait. You might jump into your car, open up your laptop, your tablet, whatever you have, connect it to your phone, you're on the corporate network, you're doing your thing. In order to help the company navigate this immediate emergency, you cannot have rules saying that you have to always be on the VPN. You might want them to be on the VPN, but you might not be able to implement that appropriately. You might have to make different types of compromises. And this is the whole point over here. In these last 8 to 9 months, every single CISO, every single enterprise, every single mid-market company has had to make compromises. And this is the reality today. We no longer have a clean island of access. We no longer have a clean island of identities, an island of credentials. So then the question becomes, who is it that's part of this picture? Who are the actors in these pictures? We've all dealt with various types of workflow diagrams. And in each one of these workflow diagrams, we always talk about who are the actors, how are lines connecting these actors, what are they actually doing? In this case, when we talk about privileged access management, for the modern way of thinking about it, it is no longer the IT person or the developer. There are many different personas who need to access various types of privileged accounts. What are these personas? Why do they need to access all this stuff? The reality of the matter is today, the definition of a privileged user has changed. Why? Because even a junior employee, junior by your hierarchical HR standards, still can access significantly important customer-facing information from within your company or even outside the company. What is an example of that? Typical examples are, and these are a little bit non-obvious for folks sometimes, support people. Every single company has support people who are helping their customers. Support folks have access to many types of significantly critical information inside the company. How many licenses does a customer have? What are the problems that they're facing? Sometimes customers might just give credentials to the support team, like just fix my problem, let's get it done. Many different things happen from a support perspective. And support is just one example where it is a little bit non-obvious in terms of who is a privileged user. And as you see on the top row over here, whether it's IT administrators, developers, business users, all these people are part of the actor framework, the personas who need access to privileged accounts. Now, not only is it important to understand who gets access, but it's also important to recognize that the amount of access for any significant actor in here has also changed. Why? Traditionally, if you look at the last 10 years, the role of developers has also changed. DevOps has become a much larger part of the picture inside companies. So when developers used to have, traditionally they used to be boxed into an area to say, why don't you just access your Git repo, SVN repos, CVS, anything of that sort, get your code, do your thing, test your code, etc., blah, blah, blah. Now, in fast-moving environments, even in groups within large enterprises which work as startups, developers are oftentimes not just responsible for writing quality code and maintaining it, but also for deploying it, for making sure it actually works. So the role has expanded. And if you agree with those things, you will find that developers and people like them no longer just need access to privileged information on the development side. They also need access to privileged accounts on the infrastructure side, cloud side. Typical example, oftentimes developers are enrolled into PagerDuty type applications because they need to have pages sent to them, SMS messages sent to them, alerts sent to them if something goes wrong, because their role now encompasses making sure that the application is stable and is working. So this is a very simple but effective example that developers oftentimes cross boundaries in terms of not only doing actual development work, but also maintaining and supporting the business purpose of that application itself. Now, if we talk a little bit more about the customer perimeter, like how should we visualize privileged identities and privileged access? What is it that we are trying to protect, and how are we going to draw the dotted line? And the reason why this is a challenge is actually interesting because, and this is not a new thing. It's about even 10 years ago when we had this movement of slowly adopting cloud services, SaaS services, so on and so forth. The dotted perimeter line that we all used to draw around the company, that has started to vanish. There are holes, big holes in that dotted perimeter line. So then what is the equivalent mechanism to think about a perimeter, but at the same time accept the reality that we have today? That's the reason you'll see the word customer perimeter on this slide. What does that customer perimeter mean? It essentially means that any enterprise, any business should treat itself as a customer, as if it is consuming services from various other entities. So now in this case, for example, you see employees, vendors, these are all consuming services, and your services are actually either in on-premise environments or your cloud environments, whatever you have. And on the cloud environment side, typically people would think, oh, you have, you're consuming some services from, say, Workday for HR, you're consuming some services from Salesforce for CRM, typical examples of that sort. But it goes way deeper, way deeper, because when you talk about DevOps, the new trends that we see in the market is for companies to focus on their core code and leave the headaches of managing and uptime for that particular product to somebody else. How? A typical example would be services like, and many services are available like this. Just one example that I'm familiar with is AWS RDS. What is AWS RDS? AWS RDS is a relational database system. Essentially, it's a bunch of databases that you can spin up on AWS and not have to manage uptime for these databases. Essentially, just use them. You're not responsible for the uptime of these databases, patching of these databases, things of that sort. That's a great concept. But the point being, all these core services that were primarily inside your organization, inside your dotted line, as I mentioned, are now outside. So these are now part of your cloud posture. These are part of all the extra third-party services that you're consuming. So again, how do you define this customer perimeter? Who are you a customer of? What are you consuming? How do you draw that dotted line? The three laptops that you see in the middle essentially signify the mechanisms or where PAM is supposed to be implemented. Privileged access management is, you can think of it as a service that is consumed by your employees, that is consumed by your vendors, and you can optionally have multi-factor authentication. It hurts me to say optionally, but that should not be an option, but you can choose what type of multi-factor authentication, biometric or not, that you can choose on top of privileged access management. But anybody who gets any privileged access management product, is really important to have multi-factor authentication, because these are the keys to the kingdom. Now, these PAM solutions, it used to be the case a couple of years back that, oh, you want a PAM solution, we'll install it in your data center, and that's the way you will use it. And it's not that people were stupid. The reason why that approach was vetted thoroughly and people were accepting that was because most of your assets were in your data center. You could draw that dotted line. Now you can't. You have assets everywhere. So where do you put your PAM infrastructure? Do you put it in the on-premise? Do you put it in the cloud? Where do you put it? And ultimately, that is a question that can only be answered by that specific company. In this case, what we see in the market is PAM solutions are now converging. It is no longer the case that a PAM solution can say, hey, I'm just going to manage your on-premise information. I'm not going to manage your cloud. No, the PAM solution has to manage both of them. That's the concept of the customer perimeter, that the customer sets the perimeter that they need protection for. We've talked a bit about who are the various actors? Where do you put the PAM solution? How do you draw the perimeter around what you have to protect? Let's talk a little bit about where there are various levers in the privileged access management space also. When we talk about the various actors, not every actor can be looked at in the same way. For example, some of the actors for privileged access management are higher in raw numbers. The number of users who will be part of that group are higher, but at the same time, from a risk perspective, what is it that they have access to also should make a difference. So there has to be some kind of a gating function that takes X and Y into consideration and then gives you a score or helps you understand what is it that you are trying to protect and how much protection should be allowed. The concept is simple, but oftentimes this is missed in terms of, and where is it missed and what is the effect of this thing? The reason why it is missed is because privileged access management traditionally has been focused on what is it that you are protecting. Privileged access management has always been thought about, if I have a server that has critical customer information, I will put XYZ in front of that. If I have something else that's super important, I will put XYZ and ABC in front of that. If it's not important, I'll put ABC. But it's also, the focus has always been, what is it that I'm protecting? What we have to recognize over here is that because of the type of migration that has happened from in-premise or on-premise and into the cloud, everybody and their mother in the company is now one way, shape, or form part of the privileged users group. So if everybody in the company is slowly becoming part of the privileged users group, how are the striations going to work out? Because not everybody can be as important. Not everybody needs that level of security. And this is one way for people to score and understand who is it that I need to be focused on, because it has to be a function of the number of people and the risk associated with every single individual, which gives you an aggregated score to understand, oh, these are the people who need this type of policy. These are the people who need another type of a policy, so on and so forth. Simple concept, but these two worlds are coming together primarily because of this movement. Now, when we talk about this path to access, various types of things, just like we've talked about food pyramids when we were young, and some of you might still be very young, but when we talk about these food pyramid things, this is essentially a way to show what are the various layers through which you have to traverse in order to get to the core of the organization, which is customer data. Whether it is your infrastructure, your Kubernetes, whatever it is, your initial authentication layer, but these are essentially the layers in a pyramid that you have to pass through in order to get to your data. Why is this important? This is important because unless you have striations of this sort, unless you understand what these layers are there, you really cannot have a very effective privileged access management strategy. Now, how has this changed over a period of time? This has changed over a period of time because traditionally, authentication and identity layer used to be smashed together in a lot of organizations. But with the coming of newer products, more easier to use products in the IAM space, in the PAM space, in the IGA space, it has become easier to separate both of these, as they should be, authentication and identity, in two different layers. Privileged access layer comes after both of these, and then you have infrastructure, application, and all these types of things. Very quickly, when we talk about privileged access management in general, one of the changes in the market that we have seen is that traditionally we focused on people who were system admins. Traditionally, we focused on people who had access to the core resources of the company. But is that enough? Not really. Because with the way the market has been pushed due to various circumstances out of anybody's control, there are automation requirements that have been placed on various groups. Why? Because every single company wants to get the maximum bang for the buck. You want to get as much utility out of a piece of product that you have purchased. Every single dollar that you spend, you want to get the maximum utility out of that single dollar. How do you do that? Automation. You have to cut out as many human beings in the pipeline. And a very simple example of this is CI/CD pipelines, continuous integration, continuous deployment pipelines. You don't necessarily need a person to do various kind of testing and check out and check-ins and all these types of things. Now, you'll see there are three groups over here. Privileged human users, which is standard, we can understand that. Privileged non-human users, and then business users. We've talked about this, but this simple depiction on the screen helps reinforce the fact that there are these three distinct groups that we need to keep in mind for our privileged access management strategy. I think I will pause here for now. We've gone through the learnings that we have seen in the market, and what we have seen are the various changes that have come into the market based on COVID and the work from home movement that is a reality for all of us now. It's been a pleasure. Brian, if you'd like, you can take the ball back.